So, good morning. Clearly, it's reaching the end of the semester. People just drop like flies in the last 3 weeks. Truth be told, I actually think this is some of the most fun stuff we do when we finally start to bring everything together and put the stuff together in Photoshop. So hopefully you're well into your final project. What we're doing for the next 4 classes, we're going to do an elevation, a plan, a section, and a perspective. You will pick from those for your last assignment. So if you're doing the work in class, you're basically doing your assignment as you go. If you're not quite there yet, you should still do the elevations today, and you can choose not to include those in the final because you're picking 3 of 4. But at the same time, it's important to start getting used to how do you make good quality outputs from SketchUp, and that's what we're going to really concentrate on for the next 4 weeks. I do, however, have to have all of you take a survey. I wrote the address up here, but sometimes it's easier to click on a link. So under the exercise page for today, there's a survey that I'm going to ask you all to start your day by doing. It's right here. Before we begin, please fill out the following survey. And this has to do with the kinds of classes we're offering and whatever. Daniel asked me to have all of you do it. So if you wouldn't mind taking 5 to 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll start on the real lecture. Okay, so thank you guys all for filling out that survey. I appreciate it. If you walked in late, I'll come around and find you and make you take it too. But anyway, so we're going to start today with elevation views. And I think for whatever reason, it seems easiest for people to grasp elevation views when we first start. And so we'll do elevation views, we'll do plan views, then we'll do sections. Or maybe we do sections and then plans, I forget. And then we'll do a perspective view at the end. It's important for you guys to go through this process because this is a lot of how you make the really high quality quote renderings when you're going to do your final project. And whether you're modeling in SketchUp or you're modeling in Rhino and V-Ray, this kind of Photoshop work is critical to quickly get through and get good quality results out. If you look at any of the kind of high-end rendering companies or render firms, or you look at architects' work when they're doing competitions or stuff, a huge amount of it's done in Photoshop doing this kind of post-processing work. And you can fake an awful lot when you go through and do this. So I have a Yosemite cabin that I've thrown in here that I'm going to use as an example. It doesn't matter really what it looks like, but it's a kind of a good varied facade so that you can kind of see the process that I'm going through. I did pull in the terrain just so that you can see where it's sited. I'm not that concerned with siting yet because we're just doing an elevation and we're going to fake what the backdrop is anyway. But we'll pull in the siting information when we do the plan, and I'll show you kind of that process as well. So anyway, it's here. What I want is an elevation view of the building. And there's not really, the back end is not exactly that attractive. The front end is kind of the most attractive. So I'm going to do the front as my elevation. Today for your exercise 127, I am asking you to do 2 elevations. So pick a front and a side or a front and a back. It doesn't really matter which ones you pick. But the process of doing that will teach you a lot about of this kind of work. So when I go to the camera menu here, I have something called standard views. And this is a lot of times a really easy way of getting yourself into an elevation view. So I'm going to start with the standard views, and I'm going to go to the front view. And hopefully it is, in fact, the front view. Sometimes it's not, depending on how you modeled it. If it's not, pick the back or the side, etc., and you'll get there. The one thing that SketchUp does, however, is when you pick one of these views, it defaults into a perspective mode. And so we're in a 1-point perspective where all of our lines are receding to that 1 point behind our drawing here. And because of that, we're not getting a truly accurate elevation view of this front. So what I need to do is I need to switch this from what's called perspective view to parallel projection. And so if I go to the camera menu here and I switch from perspective to parallel projection, right? This looks an awful lot like a true elevation would look. Okay? So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that I can see this nicely. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this view so that I can come back to it over and over again. So before I do any export, I'm always going to save my views. And so you see that I already actually have a bunch of these views saved, but we'll go through this again. I'll go to Window, and then Scenes. And this will bring up the little Scenes window here. Oops. And of course, all right, let me come back here. Let me go to Window, Scenes. There. And I can click the little plus icon. And when I click that, it'll create a new scene. And I can rename this scene. See if it's going to let me show details. There it is. And I can rename scene 6 to be front elevation. And I'm going to call it 2 because I already have a front elevation. But you get the idea. So there's front elevation 2. And the nice thing is it shows up here as one of these tabs. And you can quickly jump back and forth between different things. So for example, I could jump to the plan view. And then I can jump back to the front elevation view like that. And so as you move forward and you have these different views, being able to jump between the views is always really useful. Okay? So now we come back to exactly what we did in the Francis Ching exercise 125, where we're going to create several exports. And I'm going to start going through basically the same same set of exports that I've done before. So I'm going to start in my Styles menu. So I went to Window and then Styles to bring up the Styles menu. And I'm going to start with under Default Styles, I'm going to pick Hidden Line. And when I do that, you see that I get a very, very basic line drawing, which is what I'm after. And I'm going to go to the View menu. I'm going to turn off Guides. I'm going to turn off Axes, right, to make that go away. And I'm going to turn off Shadows, right, so that I have just a very basic line drawing, which is what I'm after. Okay. Once I have this, I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'll save this onto my flash drive. And so we will call this front elevation lines.jpg. I'm going to click on Options and make sure that I choose reasonable options. 3,000 pixels in width is probably fine. Remember, I talked about this in the Francis Ching part. Depending on the size of your output, right, how big it's going to print on the poster board that you're creating, you want to pick the correct export size, right? 300 pixels per inch when you print. So multiply the number of inches that you want the final drawing by 300, and you get the total number of pixels. So in this case, I'm doing 3,000 pixels, which means I can print it 10 inches wide. Okay? And it'll be in reasonably high quality. Okay? If I wanted to go bigger, big plot, something like that, I just have to multiply up. Okay? I think there's a limit in SketchUp that you can only go up to 10,000 on the export, but I'll go back and double check that. I have it set at best quality here, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll go ahead and export. OK, so this is my basic line setup. The next thing that I'm going to want is an Xray view of this to kind of get a little bit of depth. So I'll go into my Edit, and I'm going to go to Faces, which is the little kind of tannish cube. And I'll turn on Xray, which lets me see through the building slightly. Okay? And I'll do another export. So I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And we'll call this Xray. And I'll go ahead and click Export. Now remember, all of this is available in the SketchUp 4.4 tutorial, so that you can go back through and do everything that I'm doing. Right? So I'll turn Xray back off. And now I'm going to go to my Edit menu, and I'm going to go back to this first icon here from the face settings over to the edge settings. I'm going to turn off edges and profiles, which basically makes all my lines go away. And then I'm going to turn on my shadows. So we see the shadows. I already have the sun set. If I wanted to adjust the sun, I can go to Window, Shadows, and then we can adjust the time of day, etc. And so I'm already relatively happy with the way this looks, but you can adjust the shadows for whatever's appropriate for you. Now that I have the shadows on, oops, Doing such a good job of showing my shadows. Every time I click off, it goes away. There. I'm going to go to File and then Export 2D Graphic, if it will let me. It's thinking. Boy, it's having trouble right now. Apparently. Let's try this again. Export 2D Graphic. There we go. And I'll call this Shadows. I'll click Export. So now I have the Shadows view. So the last thing I'm going to do is go back to my styles, and I'm going to give myself something that has a little bit more, we can call it flair. So I might try the airbrush with endpoints. It looks a little heavy-handed here, but a lot of times in the export it doesn't look so bad. So I'm going to go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and I'll call this Airbrush. Now I did skip over the guides export for just the guides. I don't have any guides, so it's not going to look as if I did anything, so it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I might also turn on the gray pen. This one can have pretty good results too. So I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and we'll call this pen gray. Export. Okay, so I have all of those set. Oh, I'm supposed to turn off the shadows before I did those last two exports. All right, let me do that export one more time. I want to keep, to the extent that I can, everything separate so that the shadows is on its own layer. It doesn't show up on any of the rest of the pieces because it will make these too dark when I do the final export. There we go. And let me do this one more time. Perfect. So those are done. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. Remember, I'm going to open up CS6, not CS3. And I'm going to pull these all together, just like we did with Francis Ching. So this is a repeat of exercise 125 thus far, except it's your own drawing. I'll go to File and then Open, and I'll start with the lines drawing. And lines will be first. And then I'll go ahead and go to File and then Place, and I'll bring in the rest. So we'll go next to Xray. I'll say OK. We'll go to File, Place, and bring in Shadows. And my airbrush. Looks a little heavy-handed. Depends on the export size. And we'll do the pen gray, which will probably look a little better. Yeah, that one looks pretty good. So go ahead and say OK. So I have all of those loaded in. Now, just like I did before, I need to make each of these layers change the blending mode from normal to multiply. Just going to let them all see through, and we'll get what the elevation looks like. There are, of course, extra little, like this line is extra. I don't really need that. And for whatever reason, I think my background turned dark. Probably means that I had a section plane that was still on. Let me go back to SketchUp, View. Yeah, turn off section planes, and that should go away. Yeah, there it was. So that was my mistake. It was a slight gray background. I missed it. But I can post-process it out in Photoshop. It's not the end of the world. Or I can go back through and resave. Right, so it's there. So now what I need is I need to start giving this context and background. Right, and so I know this is going to be in Yosemite Valley, and I want to show some background that makes it fit within the context of a scene. Okay, in this, I need to find a photograph that will work. Obviously, we haven't done a site visit, but if you were doing a project, typically you would do a site visit, which means you'd take your own photograph and you'd have a photo of the exact site in the exact location where the north elevation would be. we're approximating. I picked Yosemite Valley as a site because there's a bunch of photographs available for you, right? So it makes life really easy. So I'm going to jump over, and I started a Creative Commons search, and I'm searching through Flickr, and I typed in Yosemite Valley as my search term. Let me jump back here. I originally did Yosemite Valley, and I didn't really like the results, so I changed it to Yosemite Meadow. And I have search results coming up. What I'm doing is I'm trying to look through and see which image looks like it would fit nicely with my building's elevation, right? So this one might work pretty well, right? I've got the grass in the foreground. I could probably put my building elevation right in there. It would look fairly reasonable, right? This one is a little too much in perspective. This one is a little high looking down, but I do like the little road tracks here, but I don't like the mountains so much. So I'm going to go through, right? And as I go through, I'll keep looking. That one could end up okay. This one probably would work nicely, right? And so as I go through, what I typically do is I open them in new tabs so I can go back and see which one fits my scene the best, right? One of the things you want to kind of pay some attention to is what do the shadows look like in the background, right? So this example image I actually really like, but notice that the shadows are coming from the opposite side. So I would either need to invert this, right, which makes it not really accurate to where it would be, or I need to pick a different image. So as we go through, right, something like this, the shadows here are falling this direction, right, which would work with the way my scene is and my sun. So that one would end up working out okay. This one, the shadows are kind of straight down, so it doesn't really match. All right, this one here, the shadows are in the correct direction, so this one would work out okay as well. So I point that out as a way of kind of deciding what's appropriate when you pick a particular photo. So let me go back. That one didn't work. This one worked out okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the download this photo link. I want the original size. It's there. And what was my other choice? Yeah, this one might work as well. So I'm going to download the original size. Okay, this original size is a lot bigger, so I'll probably use that one instead. So let me go ahead and show this in a folder. There it is. And I'm going to copy this and then put it onto my flash drive. And I'll go to paste. All right, so there it is. So now I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and I'm going to go to File and then Place, and I'm going to pick that backdrop. And it's going to drop it into my scene. Obviously, it's a lot smaller than I originally wanted, so I'll press Control- to zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to scale this by holding down the Shift key and kind of adjusting where this is going to go. Now, sometimes it's helpful to place this image below, if it's going to let me. Now I'm going to have to commit to it first. Put this below everything else so I can kind of see where the building would fall. Right? I could even put it below the background. Well, putting it below the background isn't going to work. Right? So my ground is right there. Right? Let me use my Move tool, and we'll adjust it so that the building's going to sit kind of nicely into the grass of the scene. Right? And probably something like that will work. All right. So I'm kind of adjusting it. If I wanted it, from a photographic standpoint, it's composed rather nicely, right? It's going to make my life easier if I pull this over a bit so that this branch doesn't intersect my drawing there. Likewise, this tree doesn't intersect. So you see, I'm trying to be a little bit cautious. At the same time, if those did intersect and I allowed those to overlap, it's a little more Photoshop work, but it would probably integrate the scene better, right? So maybe I'll use that as an example, and I'll actually have those overlap a bit, something like that. But it's going to make a little bit more work on my part. So I've got that positioned relatively correctly, and I'm starting to like what I'm seeing. So the next piece of this is I need to, one, delete out where the building is, because obviously the building's not transparent. So we'll start with that piece. So what I'll do is I'll jump to one of the background layers. We can actually turn off everything except for the drawing here. And let me turn off Xray. All right, so the first thing that I need to do is I need to select, right, everything that is my building. The good news is, since the background is the same color outside, I can use my magic wand tool, as long as I'm on the background layer, and select the entire background. There it is, right? Then we can turn back on my photographic example here. I can click on it, and then I can say Add Layer Mask, and it's going to clip out, right, using a mask, which is what we've done in Photoshop, the background, such that we can now see the building as if it were standing. Okay? So this isn't bad. The problem is that I still have pieces of this branch that should come through. I have pieces of this tree that should come through. I have a little bit of grass that I'm going to have to deal with on the edge. So I need to make a few more adjustments to this. And so if we click on our mask here, remember anything that I paint in white is going to become transparent. So let me come in here, and we'll concentrate on this corner for just a second, where this tree is. And I'll switch over to my paintbrush, and I'm going to paint in white, and I'm going to change my brush to be just a standard circular brush, and I'm going to paint a little bit of this corner so that I can see where my tree is. Then I'll flip my colors, and I'm going to paint in black. Oops, that was not the right key. Sorry about that. And let me make my brush a little bit smaller. Let me zoom in a little bit. Right, and I'm going to work my way around this part of the image. Right, that I need to flip. So this takes a little bit of time. Darn it, I keep hitting the wrong key. Sorry about that. All right, so let's come in here. Oops, flip the color. Come in here. Sorry, I know this is not the most exciting thing to watch me do this, but it's all part of it. So I'm looking for parts of this that are kind of that yellowish background color to help these integrate. All right, so if we do Control minus and we start to look, when we zoom out, it looks like this is in front of the tree. Does it make sense so far? Okay. I can do the same thing up here with that branch, but I'm not going to have you guys suffer through me doing it. But I can do the same sort of thing. So with a little bit of masking work, I'm getting the results. So now the next part of this is the building right now looks like it's kind of still floating, and I need a way of grounding the building into the ground. And since we're in the middle of a very grassy meadow, it would be realistic to have some of the grass appear above where this window would occur. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a special brush that's in Photoshop that's called the grass brush. And so if you scroll down here, you'll see one that's called the grass brush. And if I make the brush bigger here for a second, oops. Oh, come on. There we go. You can kind of see that it's a forked little brush. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here, and just like I did before, I'm going to let parts of this show through at the bottom. And so I'm still on the mask, and I'm going to be painting in white this time. And I'm going to, oops, those are way too big. I'm going to shrink this down. Right? And I'm going to go along here. Why is this not? Yeah, there we go. I don't see why. Hold on, let me back up for a second Sorry, I have to double check some settings here. Good, that's working. So the problem here is it's working here, but it's doing the opposite on this end. So what I really need is I need a quick selection to be done. And I'm going to select inverse so that I'm only working inside of this. And so let me come back to my mask, and we'll go back to my paintbrush with my grass brush, and now it's only going to show up on this part of it. So I'm going to come along here in the bottom, right, and add some of this grass through my building. Right. The other option that we have is we could clone stamp instead of letting this show through this way. I don't know that one is necessarily better than the other. The key is just having a little bit of variety in the grass texture, so that it mimics what this is supposed, what a building would look like. Now, there's one other trick to this part of it. So here, you see how I have kind of the longer reeds, right? I need to respond by making a little bit longer reeds that come through, something like that. And then I also need to, when I come back here, if I press Control 0 and we look at it, see how I've softened that edge nicely, right? But if we look closely, I'm still seeing a little bit too much of the black line at the bottom. I need to fix that. So I'm going to come in with my paintbrush, not the grass brush, just the regular brush. And let me press Control plus to zoom in. And let me, oops, wrong brush, paint with white. And I want to make sure that I get rid of that line altogether. Right. And so this isn't right in here. It's not turning out as nice as I would like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this layer, which means I'm kind of permanently applying the mask. So let me go ahead and right-click and say, it's not going to let me do it. Right-click and say rasterize layer, right, which should take away the, isn't it nice? It's always good when it doesn't do what I want it to do. It's apply layer mask, which kind of permanently changes this image. So if I were to turn it off, see how it's permanently changed. And then I'm going to use the clone stamp tool with that grass brush. So we'll copy from, I'm going to copy from over here and do a little bit stronger. So I'm getting too much down here. This is probably too big. And let's come along here. And I'm going to make this a little bigger. So I'm going to work my way through with a few little copies, right, to start to help that come through. Oops, wrong key. And just soften that lower edge. All right, so now I can turn these back on, and we see that we have a little bit more there shining through. There's a little bit of that base there. If I spend a little bit more time, I could make it go away. You see that it's gone away all along here, but you also see that this building feels like it's into the ground now. There's a big difference between when it's sitting on top of and being integrated with the drawing. So now I have that relatively done. In reality, I should spend a little bit more time right there. But now it's time to start thinking through some of the other things. So we have the shadows, which we can turn on and have a look. Remember, we can do the dodge and burn on the shadows to try to make those adjustments. So I'm going to come up to the shadow layer. I'm going to say Layer, New Layer. This is going to be a dodge and burn. And it's going to be a overlay with a 50% gray. And then I can use the dodging and burning tools to darken parts of the shadows. Right. Now this is applying to more than just these shadows, so I want this to apply just to the layer directly below it. So I'm going to select this dodge and burn. I'm going to press Control-Alt-G, which applies this layer just to one layer below it. So that's been done. So I've integrated that a little bit. You see that the shadows are falling onto the grass, which is how they should be. Looks like I have a little bit of a step here in the front that I probably need to adjust a bit. I'm getting a shadow there that I didn't resolve perfectly. So, we'll spend a little bit of time working on that. The next piece of this, however, is to go in and to add some building siding or maybe a rock base or something like that. So if you guys remember back, way back in the class, we did those tiling textures. You can use any of those to do this kind of collage work. So if I go back to tiling textures, right, there are a bunch of options that are out here. Let's say I wanted to add a wood texture. Right, I can pick on something like this. I don't like that one. That one's going to end up too close. Repeating pattern. I'll use this one. All right, so let me save image as, and I'm going to save it into my flash drive. All right, and then I'll come back to my scene, and I'm going to go ahead and go to File and Place, and I'll bring in that image. Oops. Which will be here. Obviously, it's way too big, so I'm going to hold down Shift as I make this smaller, right, until it's about the right size, right? And then I'm going to need to copy and paste this a number of times to kind of fill up this region, okay? So I'm going to press Control-A and then Control-C and then Control-V, and I'll get another little version of this, and we can stack that together. So I'm covering up this part of the building, right? I'm not going to do that part, but I'll do this part here. I'll do this part right here. Looks like I need one more right there. And so I'm just pressing Control-V because I have this as a copied image. And since it tiles, I can keep repeating this. All right, so I have all of that. Oh, looks like I'm missing one at the very top here. Something like that. So I have all of those applied roughly where I want them to be applied. They showed up, right, as a giant list. So since that's too many, I'm going to turn everything off except for all of those layers. Right? So those are the only ones that are visible. And I'll go up to Layer, Merge Visible, which will make all of those one layer with all of those images on it. Okay? Now I need to turn back on the background, and I'm going to select, and again, I can use the magic wand to do this, if I'm on the background layer. This piece, I'm going to hold down Shift to continue. That piece, and this piece. Unfortunately, it selected this lower section, so we'll go back and subtract from the selection by holding down Alt, the lower part there. So I have upper, upper, upper. Looks like I should probably select, I'm holding down Shift here, that part and that part as well. Okay, so I have all of those pieces selected. Press Control 0. And I want to use these as a mask on this layer. So once those are selected, I'm going to click on Add Layer Mask. Oops, backwards. Let me turn it on. I'm going to add a layer mask, and it's going to clip those for this part of the building. Okay? These are probably kind of a strong texture if we turn everything back on here. All right, we can turn on our shadows and our background. It's probably a little bit dominant. So in reality, I might want to tone that down a bit. So I'll take this layer, and I'll change the opacity down so that I get just a hint of what the building would look like. Does that make sense? Right? So I've got that part figured out. I'd like to add some rock to the bottom part here. So once again, I'll go to File and then Place. And I need to bring in some kind of a rock texture. Let me look. I think I downloaded one of these last year, last semester. Yeah, something like this will work. I want it a little bit more rustic. Okay, so let me go ahead and shrink this down a bit, and I'm actually going to distort it a little bit, something like that. And then I'll go ahead and commit to it. There it is. I'm going to select it, turn everything else off, select it, copy, Control C, and then I'm going to start my Control V so I get that paste. Let's turn the background back on so that I can see. And I'd like this to kind of appear there. And I'd like another piece to appear over here. I'd like another piece to appear right there. Now this one, unfortunately, doesn't quite seam, so I'm going to have some issues with how they come together. But for right now, I'm just going to go with it. Go right there. And we'll go right there. Okay, so I have those put together. Again, those are the layers. Let me turn everything else off except for these. I'll go up to Layer, Merge Visible. And those now come together. And then we'll turn back on my background. And I'm going to select these lower sections. Oops. That plus this plus this plus that. Let me zoom in a little bit. Plus this. Minus. And again, it selected that upper section, so I have to subtract that off. Still subtract that off. So I have all of that selected. I'm going to go back to my rock at the bottom, and I'll click on Add Layer Mask. Oops. Sorry, wrong layer. Add Layer Mask. There we go. And I get the rock that is at the bottom, and I get the rock that's on this face. Okay, it's probably a little bit big. And again, it's a little bit strong, so I'll turn the opacity down so it's not quite so strong. Then we can turn back on the shadows. etc. And you start to see that I'm putting that together with a little bit of texture on it. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Because the shadows are on their own layer and they're doing the multiply, they still apply to any of these materials that I add to it. The last little piece might be to add a little bit of a sky reflection to the glass so we know what the glass is. And so one of the things that's important to recognize is I'm dumping a bunch of stuff on this drawing right now. It may be just enough to have the background with the grass. It may be enough to have a little bit of collage with some of the materials on it. It really becomes what looks right to your eye, right? I'm showing you all this stuff so that you can see a bunch of options, right? But not all of it is necessarily critical for you to do. So you have to kind of think what looks good and what doesn't look good. So do edit as you go along. I'm not going to, for example, put any roofing on this, right? But you could, as an example. So let me go ahead and I'm going to do the reflections in these windows. So let me go ahead and I'm going to place in a piece of sky. So I'll go to File, Place, and I know I have some sky here. Bear with me for just a second. It'd be nice if I could see what. I'll pick this one, and I'm going to make it bigger. I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Free Transform, and scale this up a little bit. All right, so I have that. I'll go ahead and say OK. And now I'm going to turn everything off except for my original drawing. And I'm going to zoom in, and with the magic wand, I'm going to select each of these each of these panes of glass, like this. And I'll press Shift, and we'll click through. Hold down spacebar to pan. Okay, so I have all of those selected. I'll jump back up to my windows, and I'll click on Add Layer Mask, right? And it'll cut out the blue for these windows, right? So that I get a little bit of glass. They're definitely too strong, so I'm going to change that opacity way down, right? So that I have just a hint of that blue. And then we'll go ahead and turn back on, right, my line drawings. I do have my X-ray turned on, which gives just a sense. Oops, that's shadow. Gives just a sense of what happens behind. I kind of like it as a look, but you're going to have to decide what works for you. The other thing is when I start to turn these other drawing pieces on, you see that line is appearing again at the bottom, right? Which makes it less grounded. I'm going to change my background to be up on top of the stack, which means that it's going to ride above everything else, and therefore get rid of that little bit of a lower line. Let me see here. And you turn on that rock. That's good. I think that's a little too heavy-handed. I don't want it that heavy. And so I'm pretty happy with what's happened here. The pen may need a little bit more, right? It's just giving them the casual little tick marks. I want that to be a little bit stronger, so I'm going to duplicate that layer, right, which will just darken that up just a little bit. So I'll press Control-0. And we end up with a fairly reasonable result. Okay? So this is what you're going to be doing today in terms of trying to integrate. I probably should come back a little bit with this and try to get those pieces. The tree, I think, helps a little bit ground it. Obviously, the grass at the bottom helps ground it. In this particular instance, I don't have any sort of a path that's woven in to get to the front door. It would be nice if I had something like that, but it would take a little bit more Photoshop work to put that in. I'd have to find one on another photo and add it in. Okay? Are there any questions? No? I know these kinds of lectures end up being a lot to take in. There's a lot of different steps. I do have some write-ups that may help guide you a bit. I don't have one for an elevation view, I don't think, but I do have one for a section view. And if you go to the tutorials and you go to assemblies at the bottom here, let's see, I have sections. Oh, I do have elevations. Nope, I haven't written it up. I just have the video. So anyway, it's there if you want to follow along with what I did. You can also look at some of the other ones. Obviously, we're going to do the perspectives. We're going to do the plans, etc. The sections one gives a lot of the same kind of steps, but it also has all the step-by-steps of how you integrate the background and that sort of thing. Okay? So anyway, I'm very anxious to see what you guys come up with. Obviously, if you haven't quite finished the model, finish the model first. But I do definitely want you to get something out of Photoshop today in a building elevation. Okay?